So, Mike, I hear
Rick
that you knocked it out of the park at a conference yesterday. What did you do?
knocked it out of the park. Well, I was asked to talk. So I do the Daily Blast, right, and have done for 15 years or whatever.
Yep.
And so because of that, I feel pretty well informed on the way things are changing quickly, and the events and issues that we need to pay attention to. And
Mhm.
so I was asked to go talk about emerging threats and trends and things like that, and that's exactly what I did. And I think I went too long, but nobody cared. And I hit a lot of stuff. I missed a lot. I didn't talk about quantum computing. I didn't talk
Mhm.
about, burnout in the practitioner community or anything like that. But, I talked about how things are piling up with activists and kids getting into, teenagers getting into crime because they affiliate with these Russian gangs. And there's a
Mhm.
story out this morning about exactly that. This group called the Calm and how violent they are. They actually shoot people's houses and throw bricks through windows and
Seriously?
threaten them to say, "You give me a login to your corporation or we're coming to your house." Yeah. And I mean, stuff is just getting out of control. What's going to happen in the election, with disinformation,
Mhm.
meets artificial intelligence and deep fakes and things like that, and surgically targeted disinformation that stays off the radar so that we can't find it and counter it. It was not a happy talk. I scared myself.
Well, in honor, like in honor of cybersecurity or in honor of Halloween?
Halloween.
Uh-huh. Speaking of scaring people, we have security awareness training today at noon Pacific, and
Yep.
we're going to scare people there too. If you're coming, Mike is going to dress up. And Mike doesn't know that yet, so he has 2 hours to figure that out.
I am not dressing up for
Also,
this. I am
you
dressing
are.
up for the gig we're doing a Halloween gig on Saturday, and I am
Mhm.
actually going to have my daughter paint my face like Peter Criss.
Ah, that's pretty good. That's
Hmm.
good. That's good. Um,
I'm going to play better than Peter Criss though, because he was a crappy drummer. I'm sorry to tell you people that, but it's the truth.
I mean, Mike, are drummers really musicians?
No, they hang around with musicians.
Okay. Um, Also, this week we did a panel on crisis communications with
Yeah.
Resolute Communications and one of my former colleagues, Neil, and it went really well. And if folks want some of the handouts, there's actually like really great handouts for this one. Um, Obviously, the deck we created is great. But besides that, Neil created a template for crisis communications. And if you want that, shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com, and I'll send it over to you. Also, we created questions that reporters will ask you in the middle of a ransomware attack. If you
Wow.
want either of those, let me know. Happy to give them to you. And
I think I'd like a copy actually.
and lastly, um, somebody in the panel said, "Hey, how do we invoke attorney-client privilege?" And I gave a half, what an answer to that, and then contacted an attorney. Mike Borgia over at Davis Wright
Hmm.
gave me a full answer. If people want that full answer, happy to send over Mike's answer. But it's harder than it's ever been to have to invoke attorney-client privilege and have a court agree that, oh yeah, we won't you can have attorney-client privilege on that. So
Well, you
very, very
spent
important.
you spent a good amount of time talking too about what on the record and off the record really
Oh,
constitute, right? When you're talking to somebody from the press. And I
yeah.
think that was super good guidance.
Yeah, and if
Don't
anybody ever
assume that
if
because you say that it's going to happen.
yeah, if you ever say to a reporter, "Hey, this is off the record," it's not off the record. And as the guy who coached reporters on what it means to be on the record and off the record, I think I have some good opinions there. If
Mhm.
anybody wants to discuss that, hit me up. Okay, Mike, on to the news here.
Yep.
Um, there have been two articles this week, one that says ransomware is down and one that says ransomware is up.
I think it's because when ransomware is down, that's the frequency of incidents. Ransomware is up is the magnitude of the extortion demands.
Mhm.
And the one I read that was eye popping and this was the initial demand and it was negotiated, but it was $175 million. Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I'm thinking this was not a small to medium business. I'm thinking this was, some enterprise corporation. I forget who it was. It was identified, and I just don't remember. But yeah, that'll get your attention.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is a lot of money.
It did get my attention. It's scary, like Halloween.
Yeah.
Hey, also big news this week. This RPS DDoS attack with
This is
HTTP.
the
Yeah.
HTTP2, right? We talked about this
Yeah.
last week. Did we do this
Mhm.
last week? We did this
No, we
last
did.
week.
We did. Oh, yeah, we did talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what happened yesterday. What's your name again?
Yeah, Stan.
Uh-huh.
Um, 100 million requests per second. Nobody's going to survive that. And we talked to one of our key vendors about this, and they go, "Oh, well, we have Cloudflare. Cloudflare is having problems eating this many packets. This is a big deal." And, again, when we start talking about what's going to happen in elections, there is a certain method of voting that's used by overseas voters,
Mhm.
and it depends on being able to do a DocuSign like ballot marking process.
Mhm.
And this is exactly what happened in Ecuador. Their voting system specifically for their overseas voters and their uniformed military and things like that, people that are deployed, got DDoSed in the middle of an election. People couldn't vote. So, that's only one thing I think that's, we're staring down the barrel of with the upcoming election.
Awesome. That just makes me so happy. By the way, speaking of the upcoming election, so I grew up in DC
Uh,
and I
I know where you're going.
registered to vote in DC as one does. And do the bad guys now have all of my voting information
No, they have all of everyone's voting information.
in DC?
Apparently, they said may have taken there's always these weasel words in there, but
Mhm.
sounds like they got all of the voter records
For DC. And
for DC. For DC.
so when we say voting records, do we meet so they got social security numbers, they got names, but do they have the way you voted? Like, is that something that the Department of Elections
No,
keep?
because that's not in a registration record,
So
right?
they got the registration. Yeah.
But there are other ways to get how you vote, but it was a whole bunch of privacy information, right? So a bunch of PII, driver's license number, date of birth, um, partial social security numbers, apparently not full ones, contact information. So, this
Well,
can be
ha ha,
used
bad
for.
guys. I don't have a DC license anymore. So there.
So, oh wow, so you're safe, but hey, let me know, let everybody know if you start getting reach outs that look like they're using that information, right? Phishing information or whatever that,
Hmm.
reference something that may have been in that record. This, I'm sure this information, it's not going to be monetized. It's going to be used to, mess with the election.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for
who
sure.
who done it is a real interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I can guess. I can guess.
Hmm.
Hey, on healthcare, speaking of things that happen in DC, in the
Hmm.
federal part of DC, they
Oh
released a
yeah.
new cyber toolkit.
Yeah, this is a good thing. This is, and it doesn't really say anything that nobody has ever said before, right? Because we keep saying the same things over and over. So it's got a section in it about cyber hygiene services from Homeland
Hmm.
Security. They'll
Hmm.
scan your perimeter. They'll do a risk assessment for you. They'll do a bunch of stuff. Your security practices, which is, pretty standard stuff. All of the standards of practice say you got to have a firewall, got to train your users, got to blah blah blah. Right. So it's the same thing we heard. Framework implementation guide, and that's a lot about assessing risk and using the NIST cybersecurity framework. But interestingly, it also addresses resource constraints. Health, especially rural health, can't hire practitioners. And, the one thing that they called out in particular was if you're public health, you should really be tapping into the state local cyber grant program. And the second round of funding has now been activated. So, make sure that you're part of that ecosystem. You understand what your state is doing. Um, in talking to Idaho yesterday, the way that they're handling this is a lot different than the way Washington is handling this, because Washington is doing sub grants to local governments. What
And what's
Idaho
Idaho
is
doing? Yeah,
doing,
what's Idaho doing?
they're just having a big, menu of free stuff that you can get from the multi-state ISAC and other places. So while that, in my view, doesn't really align with the goals of that grant program, it is a rapid way to get some controls out there.
Huh. Interesting.
Hmm.
Interesting. Okay, next topic, Mike. Lloyd's of London. Did you see this one? The cyber attack on the major payment system, and it's a scenario, right? It's not something
It's a
that happened.
scenario.
But
Well,
they did some, they did some modeling and said, hey, this is something that could happen, and it would cost the world $3.5 trillion.
yep. Yep. Interesting, don't you think? And it says, it's the kind of thing where it wouldn't happen all at once. It would be spread out over 5 years or so,
Hmm.
with just like continuous pain for
We could all
everybody
we'd
that
all go
uses
back
the
to
banking
cash.
system.
Yeah,
We'd
we'd all.
all go back to cash, maybe. I think the other thing which was not addressed in this article is the fact that there's so much financial and other information that's been stolen in terms of unauthorized disclosure of protected records, that if that was weaponized at scale for mass fraud,
Mhm.
that would kind of have the same effect, not necessarily messing with payment systems, but just messing with people's ability to gain credit and spend money.
Yeah.
We're the consumers of the world. You mess with that, we're kind of crippled.
Yeah, and so, thinking about things that keep me up at night, you know, there are two major conflicts going on right now. Of course, Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East,
And another one heating up.
and now we're another one heating up. I guess it's true. But I mean, those are the two that are ongoing right now that really make me lose sleep. And this week, Ukraine uh, said that it had a pretty big hack in Russia.
Hmm.
Israel, said that it had a pretty big hack in Iran. Um, do you see? So, one, can you just tell people what those two were? And then do you see these spilling out into the rest of the world?
So, so yes, I see these spilling out into the rest of the world, and largely this is one thing you and I have been talking about this for a few years. This whole activists getting into the game, hacking for cause, and
Mhm.
especially if that cause is you're on the side of your country, which is fighting a war. So you go out there and mess with infrastructure. This is interesting that the one in Ukraine where they said they, hacked Russia's largest private bank had the collusion, assistance, support, whatever you want to call it, of Ukraine's intelligence services. So, this is not just your run of the mill hacktivist. This is alignment with the state, and this is Ukraine doing it. We've always suspected this elsewhere, but they just held up their hand and they said, "Hey,
Mhm.
we did this. We helped these volunteer hackers do this." And then the one, the Israelis say they disabled Tehran's electrical grid, which is a no no. I mean, just rules are coming out for volunteer hackers. And it started with the Red Cross saying, "Hey, here are the rules of war," and people are starting to get on board with that. There are things that you don't do. You don't disturb infrastructure that keeps civilians alive. I don't think everybody's going to sign on to that. There's more and more support for that, but not everybody is signing on to that because the viciousness of some of these things going on just mean that they don't really respect any rules.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, Mike. Threats and vulns make us feel
Well,
better about the world.
no, I'm not going to do that. Let's see. SolarWinds, critical remote code execution, get SolarWinds patched, and it's not every product in SolarWinds. So make sure you Google that and check out what we're talking about. See if you have that product. Rockwell Automation, and this is another thing that Mandiant recently warned about. The Volt Typhoon Chinese hackers, which are going after U.S. critical infrastructure, they're going after control systems, right? So Rockwell here is saying, you know, there's a Cisco zero day that affects their Stratix switches, and vulnerability exploit has gotten so good when something like this is announced, immediately the bad
It,
guys
right.
are developing the exploit, right? So watch out. um, Interesting one about all of the smart devices that people like you keep in your home and how that's actually a threat to national security. I'll just set that aside and let you think about that. Citrix says,
Only Mike knows that I have a connected coffee maker.
yeah. Citrix says patch NetScaler bug immediately. And this was an interesting one too. So you know how single sign-on works? Well, if a bad guy sets up a site and allows single sign-on there, it grabs a token that can be reused to other single sign-on services. So if you're somehow attracted to bad guy's site and it challenges for SSO, you get that token, and then you go over to DocuSign or wherever, you can reuse that token. And it sounds like this is a kind of a 1A flaw. And the last thing is patch VMware, because it's under exploit right now as well.
You forgot one.
What did I forget?
Patch Chrome.
Oh, patch Chrome. Good Lord.
You forgot.
Yeah, and I think Mozilla needs to be patched as well. I saw a bunch of multi-state ISAC stuff come out. When I get it, it's like a week or more old, so sometimes I don't know if I need to take it seriously or not.
All right, so at the
My
end of
stuff's
all,
patched. And by the way, Microsoft is telling us to reboot right now. I got both of my laptops here that say, I got the orange dot.
Awesome. So everyone, don't forget. I'm gonna ask Mike for the kicker here, but don't forget to come to security awareness training today because Mike will be dressed up, and he will. All right.
Yeah, I'll have that mask on. Yeah.
So Mike, at the end of all of these, the kicker, the thing to make us smile, make us think a little more deeply. What do you got for us this week?
Well, I think it is an unsurprising consequence of some of the technology that we are employing to make consumerism and delivery of products easier. So on, I think it was Oregon State University, they have robots that deliver food to dorms. And sure enough, somebody calls in a bomb threat through social media, and they had to go and stop and inspect all of the food delivery robots. All right.
Because somebody said that the robot was carrying a bomb.
Yep. And it was just a prank, right? And the prankster is in a crap load of trouble right now. But the message broadcast to all the students, you would never expect one that says, "Do not open robots." It's just a consequence of the time we're in, man. Don't open robots. Don't
open robots. I don't know that was your best one. Folks, come back next week.
There's not a lot funny going on, man. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, we're gonna find some better humor next week. And remember, security awareness training. Mike will be dressed up. Wizard of Oz, I think, is what he'll do.
So I can just be behind a curtain.
That's what we're thinking. Mike's the man behind the curtain. All right, everybody. Have a good weekend. Talk to you later.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.